Love is a drag, it's absurd. A romance novel. The cards were turned. The tables were flipped. The odds were stacked against them. It was hard to tell how surrounded they actually were. Word had spread. But with the time it took for a messenger to travel by horse, it was unclear how much time they had to escape. Flip. The crowds formed around the castle. There was a revolt incoming. In a panicked state, she moved to the window. Flip. Could you stop flipping that? Sophia's words rang through Brian's head as he laid reading, flipping his metal lighter. How do I look? Brian set down his book, watching her. She was showing off her curvy, plump figure that was wrapped in a smooth silk black sleeveless dress. Breathtaking, Brian said, shifting to his feet. Sophia pulled her hair back into a big braid, seeming pleased with his answer as she smiled at herself in the mirror. Brian was sporting a simple white button-up shirt over jeans. The room microscopically shook as Brian moved onto his feet, catching a glimpse of himself in the mirror. Hairs were falling in front of his face because they were not long enough to stay behind his ears. Do you think I'm too dressed up? Sophia was laying the lipstick on thick as Brian took up the mirror. You're asking me? Dude, have you seen our parades? I'm tame compared to that. Which means you look fine. Her words relaxed him a bit. Sophia pushed him away from the mirror as her lips popped, showing off the bright red. Sophia called their ride as they made their way into the hall. An unexpected character stood waiting for them. Dressed in a light blue suit stood the Dean of Admissions. Her hair was pulled back into a bun as black strands came down over her glasses. Going out, she asked as she pushed up her glasses, crossing her arms. Brian just stood there awkwardly, trying to give a polite smile as Sophia locked their door. Can't study too much, Sophia said, turning to her. Sophia threw her hand onto the wall as she leaned against it. You here to check up on us? The dean rolled her eyes as a smile started on her face. Just making sure you two are behaving. I've had people breathing down my neck since I put you two in that room, the dean said, joining her on the wall. Don't worry, nothing but our best behaviors, Sophia said, pushing off the wall as she grabbed Brian's arm. And call mom, both of you, she worries. The pair moved down the hall, seemingly ignoring the dean's yells. Brian couldn't help but wave goodbye as they were almost out of sight of her. The pair stood on the side of the street as cars raced by, waiting for their driver, who was a couple blocks away. Sophia seemed lost in thought as she hummed to herself. You know, I can never tell what you're thinking, Brian said, as he pulled a smoke up to his mouth. I thought you were gonna quit. Sophia took the cig from him, taking a drag. I'm weaning off of it slowly, Brian said, blowing out smoke. Very slowly. He took another big drag of the cigarette before handing it back to Sophia. Brian turned to the street only for his eyes to dart to the cigarette as it left Sophia's mouth as she flicked it into the road. Is it important? Sophia rummaged through her purse, waiting for Brian's response. Is what important? Sophia grabbed his arm, showing him how close the ride was on her phone. To know what I'm thinking. Brian had almost forgotten he brought that up. Sophia dragged him as their car pulled up. Brian didn't like talking in front of strangers and waited the whole 15-minute car ride before speaking again. They pulled up to a brick building wedged between a nail salon and a morning dinner. I don't know. But maybe it would help me from saying the wrong thing. Sophia scoffed at his words as they looked over themselves getting out of the car. Bree. If you could read minds, you'd know the perfect thing to say every time. And that would be boring, Sophia said, pushing his hair behind his ears. Brian swatted away her hands as they walked into the bar. Sophia seemed motherly, almost licking her fingers, trying to subdue his stray hairs. Laughter and drunkenness echoed through the dingy club as a speaker told his jokes from the stage. Brian and Sophia found their crowded seats amongst other strangers. Brian kept to himself as Sophia introduced herself to the couple. Brian's hands remained in his lap as he looked around the room. His eyes stopped as someone was walking their way. Rudy was cutting through the chatter. He pulled a chair, sitting next to Brian. Brian was so nervous he didn't know what to do or say. You must be Brian. Rudy's voice was high with a bit of Adam's apple. Brian turned, slowly showing an awkward smile. It's okay, I don't bite. I'm Rudy, by the way. Brian took in all of Rudy in one glance. Standing tall with messy pink hair combed to the side. A face that sunk into the cheeks. A striped tie loosely falling over an open button-up shirt that didn't leave much to the imagination. And a pair of checkered hot pants with suspenders hanging down was the appearance Brian took in from the person sitting next to him. You guys up next? Sophia asked, cutting in. A small conversation sprung up that made Brian feel left out. Nice to finally meet you officially, Brian said, grabbing Rudy's hand. Rudy took the hand and shook it as a smile grew. Brian sank into his chair as the conversation continued without him. Brian fiddled with his hands, waiting for something to happen until it did. A whistle caught Rudy's attention, and as Brian followed his gaze he saw the rest of the band by the stage as the lead singer was pulling more attention. Amber was hidden behind the others, peering out at the people drinking. As Rudy stood, Brian stood almost following. Tell Amber I said good luck. Rudy began to laugh. Which one? Brian became incredibly nervous, steering his eyes away. I'm kidding. Lover boy. Don't worry. Rudy quickly pushed through to the stage as Brian laid his head on the table. How much have you told him? Brian asked as Sophia nudged him to get up. Her. Brian looked at her, confused by her one-word reply. Rudy is a her. Don't feel bad. Honest mistake. Brian felt a wave of emotions roll over him. Thank God I didn't call her that, Brian said, shaking off his nerves. Enough, Sophia said, nudging Brian again as the room started quieting down. Brian looked up as the band pulled onto the stage. His eyes scanned each person like last time, but with more intent. He already got a good look at Rudy. Standing next to her was the lead singer. Her choppy short cut was dyed random blues and pinks and fell over her skeleton face. She was wearing a simple tank top over ripped jeans. Next to her the drummer was dressed in a brown hoodie over baggy jeans. You almost couldn't make out her face as her brown hair came down over it and down to her knees. And behind her was Amber. Dressed more or less the same as the last time he saw her, except she was in black sweat shorts. She was then pulled to the front of the stage. I'm Amber and this is Amber and we're the Ambers, the lead singer yelled, announcing their presence before everyone took their spots on the stage. As Brian sunk into his chair, Sophia popped out of hers, grabbing drinks. The lights shifted as the music started slowly. A simple mix of piano and drums hummed over the crowd as the bass soon followed. It was a bit of an intro before the guitar came in. Brian was slumped in his chair watching Amber play guitar. Her fingers drifted over the frets, bringing a scratchy sound out as she strummed. Amber had such a somber energy compared to her energetic bandmates. Finally the lyrics came in. The Ambers shifted back and forth, both sharing the mic. And you don't want to understand the way I feel. And we can't live without regrets, the feeling's real. It's real. The girls sang each line in the song in harmony during the chorus. Don't underestimate the may I feel if I cry. Listen to the sound, it makes me feel alive. Amber's voice was loud and aggressive. But Amber's voice was soft and sweet. The soft and sweet voice was all Brian was fixated on. Mesmerized with his head in his hands, Brian watched and listened to the beautiful fast music. Sophia nudged him as she waved his drink. Brian took it, hoping it would calm his nerves. Sadly, it might have made things worse as he downed the drink and cheered through the noise. Brian pulled himself to his feet, clapping as their song finished. Sophia didn't pull him down. She just watched as he started to let himself go. Brian noticed he was the only one standing and planted himself down. Sophia couldn't take her eyes off the happiness spilling out of Brian. Their table soon emptied as the band whispered to each other. Another song began. Another upbeat tune with scratchy guitar and loud drums spilled off the stage. Amber screamed the opening line at the top of her lungs before Amber took the lead. I just wish you would love me the way that I do. Brian couldn't take his eyes off the girl looking down at her guitar as she strummed through the noise. Her guitar was low, covering her shorts. The song slowed. Amber began strumming slowly, letting the sound ring out. Brian couldn't take his eyes off Amber while Sophia couldn't take her eyes off Brian. She was happy watching the smile on his face. When the song stopped, Brian stood whistling and clapping. Amber took note, thanking the crowd while Amber quietly looked away, hugging her guitar. She was shy like Brian, but something had come over him that made him want to shout to the rooftops. He had barely spoken to her, and yet it was love at first sight, or so it seemed. Brian had never really understood love, but if it could only be felt and not explained, then he definitely felt it but could not explain it. Thank you, thank you. We're the Ambers. Tip your waitress. Amber yelled at the top of her lungs as the others quietly moved off stage. Brian scanned the room as they dragged their instruments outside. They really got some energy, huh? Sophia asked, as she leaned back in her chair sipping her drink. Her knees were pressed against the table as her center of mass became stable. Brian said nothing and just watched the back door, rolling her eyes. Sophia planted herself and flicked Brian's ear. Talking to myself here. No, that's not. Ah. Should we go find them? Brian stumbled to his feet as he stumbled on his words. Sophia pulled him back down in his chair. Relax. This one word Sophia spoke did not calm him. Before his brain could refocus, the chairs around them filled with the members of the band. I'm still pumped from that set, Amber said, eyeing Brian and Sophia. Oh, let me introduce everyone. Brian. Sophia. You have met me and Amber. This is Amber and Kitty. Rudy threw everyone's names onto the table. Kitty threw her hair back, revealing her pudgy face and beautiful blue eyes that drew Sophia's stare. Wow. Your eyes are amazing. Sophia spoke like she was standing in an ancient city of wonder and curiosity. Thanks. Kitty said, batting her eyelashes. Kitty's voice was soft like an angel until it wasn't. Yo, can we get some service here, please? Brian and Sophia felt their hair blow back as Kitty screamed. Sitting across from Brian and next to Brian was Amber, but not the same Amber. Next to him was the tall, attitude-driven girl with the butched hair and tattoos, and sitting across from him was the quiet and timid girl with long black hair and glasses. Brian just looked down in his lap, trying not to stare. After a waiter took their order, the chatter around the table grew. Brian felt left out as Sophia engaged in conversation just about anything. So tell us about you, Brian. Brian shot up as Amber spoke. It wasn't the Amber he wanted talking to him, but it was an end to the conversation. I don't know what to say, Brian said, hiding his voice in his drink. The next band started as Brian was at a loss for words. Everyone was looking at him except Amber, who had her face in her lap, but her eyes were occasionally glancing up at him. Brian took a deep breath, ready to speak, only for Sophia to go first. This guy is one hell of a musician. These words worried Brian that a lie was about to form until it didn't. You should hear him play his butt like bongos. Brian's face went red as the table roared with laughter. Rudy was in stitches. Kitty was smacking the table hard. Amber was spitting up her drink. And Amber was snorting with laughter. It was the snorting that played over and over in Brian's mind. He thought it was adorable. Come on, it was one time, Brian said, rolling his eyes. One time is all you need to get the attention of talent scouts, Sophia said, poking Brian's face. Brian swatted her hand away, only for her to pull him into a hug. Please don't let that be what you guys remember me for. Brian lowered his head as his words leaked out of his mind. Then you better give us new things to talk about, Bongo Boy, Amber said, tapping the table as everyone smirked. Thankfully Amber was quiet and not teasing him. All right. My major is history. I like to read. And I'm pretty sure I'm afraid of the deep ocean. The table relaxed as everyone drank. History, huh? This voice jolted Brian. Amber was curled up in her chair waiting for a response. Yeah, that's the plan, Brian said, hiding his eyes in his drink. He watched Amber through the wavy watery lens that was his glass of beer. The conversation shifted as Brian became quiet. His eyes shifted as he followed everyone talking. I wish places had more unique drinks, Sophia said. as her drink dripped onto her tongue. You should try tequilas on Third, they got some fire whiskey. Amber said, tossing fries into her mouth. Brian and Amber were both quiet, just listening to everyone else. Brian's eyes met hers. It looked like they were both wondering if the other was staring at them. Oh yeah, I bet we looked cool up there with BR in these tight shorts. I didn't even want to wear these. They're embarrassing. The Ambers began bickering back and forth. Oh come. You're just adorable. The rest of the band just enjoyed the show. Don't you think she looks adorable, Brian? All the noise in the room disappeared. Brian felt a cold feeling wash over his body. Oh yeah, she's great, I mean they're fine. Brian's words slowed to a stop as he rubbed the back of his head, looking down at his lap. Brian couldn't handle all the eyes on him. I gotta get some air. Brian pulled a smoke from his pocket and dragged himself outside. His eyes were glued to the ground as he sparked up. As he took his first drag, feet walked into his view. The feet were attached to bare legs. Brian looked up as Amber came into frame. He almost dropped his cigarette as coughing erupted. Are you okay? Amber asked, as she grabbed his arm. Brian pulled away, trying not to cough on her. Yep, all good here. Brian coughed out words as he turned to the sky. His joints became tense with her standing next to him. Have you ever tried to quit? This was a question Brian had never really been asked before. No, but I don't smoke that much anymore. Brian unknowingly relaxed as they spoke. My parents smoked every day of their lives. Amber leaned against the brick wall as she spoke. I don't know how they are still alive. Brian lifted his shoe, putting his cigarette out on the bottom of it. Why aren't you drinking with everyone else? Brian shifted as he asked her. The sound of cars racing by added to the atmosphere of their conversation. I kinda hate the whole bar atmosphere, you know. And I've always hated drinking. Brian couldn't help but laugh listening to her. I'm sorry, I just find it funny because you play in bars. Amber scoffed as she shifted away. She pushed up on her glasses as she watched the street lights change. I guess that is kinda funny. Brian couldn't help but hold his eyes on Amber. Can I ask you something? Everything became quiet. Why are you so nervous? Brian didn't know what to say, but he couldn't let the awkward silence continue. Because I'm an idiot and I don't know how to act around you. Amber was fiddling with her fingers, standing there. I can't explain it, but when I look at you, I melt. Brian let air drip out of his lips as he pulled himself away from the wall. Wow. Don't think too hard about that. Sometimes I just say dumb things. Amber let out a loud sigh. I don't know. It sounds kinda sweet. Amber said, rubbing her arm. They looked away from each other as drunk people spilled out of the bar. Maybe we should head back inside. Brian followed her words with his feet as he tossed his cigarette into a garbage can. Sophia seemed to be in the middle of a story as they sat back down. And he was screaming at all the women. Thankfully, our manager was walking right by. Banned for life on the spot. Sophia's hands were very expressive as she vented. Here, I can't finish these. Sophia said, pushing her jalapeno poppers over to Brian. I share. Brian said, holding out the plate. Everyone took a popper, happy to eat one. The conversations kicked back up with everyone chiming in. Brian wasn't even aware of the great time he was having. They stayed so long the bar even started to close. It's late. We better get back to the dorms. Sofa said, dragging Brian to his feet. Everyone seemed in agreement as they gathered themselves. Brian and Amber stood avoiding eye contact as the place was packing up. Sophia nudged Brian forward, impatient with him wanting to go home and not waste any more time. It's okay if I text you, right? Brian quietly pushed out his words. Surprised you haven't yet. You already have my number. Amber said, as she rocked on her tiptoes. Yeah, sorry, I'm a nervous wreck. Amber didn't seem fazed by his words. Well, I'll be waiting for your texts. The two locked eyes as Amber finished her words. Brian would have stood there forever if it wasn't for Sophia, who pulled him away, putting her arm around him. Come on, Casanova. Sophia teased him as she checked on their ride pulling up.